Hello, my name is Luke Miller, and this presentation is a report on my Capstone project for my Master's in Information Technology with a Cybersecurity specialization here at the University of West Florida. My project is the Web Ninja penetration testing tool, and this is the part 2 of my report where I'll give you an overview of the project and then a live demonstration of the actual software that was developed. So we'll start off with a little bit of a project background. According to a recent CompTIA report, 80% of companies think that they are secure. Yet only 13% of those companies have made any changes to their security program in the last 2 years. What this equates to is a false sense of security for these companies. Security is constantly changing. New threats are emerging. Hackers and attackers are determining new ways to compromise infrastructure. And that means companies need to be on the edge of security if they're going to keep their network secure. To do this, they need to employ regular security testing or security audits in order to ensure that their networks are able to withstand the latest of attacks. One of the problems that arise with these regular security audits or penetration testing is that security auditors have far less time than attackers when tasked with protecting these networks. They are constrained to strict timelines and budgetary constraints. The tests are often run around a business's working hours and are constrained by contracts due to, again, finances. The hackers that they're defending against, they really do not run on such a timeline or budgetary constraints, and theoretically can spend unlimited time in attempting to discover vulnerabilities in a target domain. Therefore, security professionals need to make efficient use of their time. They do not need to be spending time doing manual processes that can be automated. And that's what this software intended to do. The Web Ninja software helps security professionals by automating certain tasks that would otherwise have to be done manually. And this frees up the security auditors or the professionals to focus on more high priority tasks that do require the trained eye of a human. It can't be automated by a computer program. So these are the requirements that were used when designing the software. First of all, the Web Ninja software was required to build a sitemap for use in the analysis of a website. Now this module of the project intended to crawl a target domain and provide basic information about the domain and setup and file structure for use in the security analysis and penetration testing of a website, meaning that it would crawl through there and pull out all forward-facing URLs. Secondly, the software will determine the security settings for a server. This includes the TLS SSL settings for the server, as well as the security certificate and any common configuration issues that might arise from a web server. And finally, the Web Ninja software will analyze a target domain for common security flaws. So the domain sitemap, it uses a web crawler to crawl through all forward-facing links on a website. It uses an open source C# crawler to do so, and it runs through there, opens up, I believe, 6 different threads to efficiently crawl through the web domain to pull out all links that are available to give the penetration tester or security professional idea of the scope of that particular website. It can be quite time consuming for large websites, so I did include a number of options to limit the scope or the type of pages crawled in order to speed up the process if the user so desires. And again, it's provided as an aid to penetration testers to kind of get an idea of the scope or the different pages that a web domain may entail. So secondly, I went ahead and probed the web server for the TLS SSL security settings in order to try to determine any kind of security vulnerabilities that may arise. The Web Ninja software will display these certificate details when the web crawl occurs, and if any kind of common configuration issues are set up on that server, it will display these as warnings for the security professional to then take a further look at. These risks will be displayed in the report and can be exported for use in further testing. It's an aid to the penetration tester to determine any kind of common attack patterns that may occur on that particular domain. And lastly, I developed for the Web Ninja software a domain vulnerability scanner. This module scans a domain for common security vulnerabilities such as cross-site request forgery, cross-site scripting, SQL injection, and again, common web server configuration issues. It compares the results that it finds to an open source vulnerability framework and determines if the particular the particular request that it's getting back from the web server match any of those vulnerabilities found within that framework. How it does this is it opens up a number of headless browsers. A headless browser uses Phantom.js, and it uses the Phantom.js browser to post a number of different threads asynchronously against a web domain attempting to probe for vulnerabilities. And it also can determine server configuration issues. It's not meant to be an authority, but more or less a tool to point the security professional to particular parts of the website that may need further inspection and potentially could be a vulnerability on that particular web domain. While I was going through the development process of this software, I did develop a testing framework. The test cases were built using the use cases from the requirement specification, and using those I automated testing using a regression testing system. In order to test this website, I did need vulnerable websites. Obviously, I didn't want to run this against live websites, but there are open source sites where users provide vulnerable websites that you can set up in a sandbox environment. An example of this being hack.me, and this was what I used when setting up the automated regression testing. And I've employed this as new features were added to ensure that any new features did not break the core functionality needed for the software. So in summary, this Web Ninja software is provided as an aid to a security professional as they go through other penetration testing activities, and it's meant to be used in conjunction with other tools and methods of securing a web domain. One of the main issues that came up when doing this was the politeness and the also legality of the software. Now the robots.txt file typically is the rules that the web domain owner has set up for crawlers and spiders, how they should interact with that particular web domain. This is not a legally binding document, but it is considered best practices. With the web crawler, I have enabled the functionality to disable abiding by this, but by default it is enabled, and we will review that later in the demonstration. The web vulnerability scanner, on the other hand, must be used with only can be used with the domain owner's explicit permission, because it is posting what could be considered as malicious requests to the web domain. You do not want to run this unless you have explicit permission, or you're testing in a sandbox environment like we will in the demonstration. Alright, so that's it for the overview of the product. Let's go ahead and get into actually using the software. So we'll go here and launch the Web Ninja application. And here it's loading up. So this is the home page. It gives more or less just a brief overview of the application, along with some warnings and different information for the user. Over here we have the two different modules, the web crawler and the vulnerability scanner. The user can click the help section if they have any questions on exactly how to use the software, and it'll give them step-by-step instructions on how to use the particular feature that they're having questions about. So we'll get started by looking here at the web crawler. And for an example, we'll go ahead and try to crawl google.com. Alright, so we started that crawl, and here we see the domain's certificate details that it pulled down and the current crawl progress. So the first URL it hit obviously was google.com, and the status here we see that it did not crawl that page due to the robots.txt file blocking it. and the config file is set to respect the robots.txt. Now Google is a proponent stating that this is not a legally binding document, and their web crawlers when indexing for their search engine commonly ignore this file. So we will go ahead and for the testing purposes go to the settings here, and we will disable abiding by the robots.txt. So we'll go back to the crawler and we will relaunch that google.com crawl. Alright, so this time you'll see that it actually started that crawl process, and it's going through and crawling all the links that it can find on google.com. Up here we see a couple different options. We have the ability to pause a crawl, so it sends a command to the asynchronous crawling process to stop it. It does sometimes take a couple of seconds as it finishes up its current processes, but eventually it will pause, and we see the crawl time stopped here. We can resume it, and also if we so desire we can end that crawl, and we'll go ahead and end it. And I do have another crawl here that does have it finished on the Google, and we see here the complete sitemap that was built by crawling google.com. If we go down to the bottom right, I have the ability to export that crawl, so we'll go ahead and export it as an Excel file to the desktop. And we will go ahead and take a look at that file. Alright, so here we see all the different links that were determined by doing the crawl, all the different links that were found, as well as all the parent URLs for each individual link. And again, this is meant to give the security professional idea of the scope of the particular domain that they are attempting to crawl. Alright, so we will go ahead now and test out our security scanner. So this domain that I've entered here is a vulnerable domain provided by a security testing web company, and it is open source, and they do give us permission to test more or less for vulnerabilities on this domain. Again, this is software that could be considered malicious, so we do not want to use this software if we do not have the express permission of the domain in order to do that. So before we start the process up, we do have a couple different options here: the timeout, the max page size, the redirect, so more or less how deep down into the website do we want to crawl. We can customize the user agent if need be, and the individual who authorized the crawl. Over here we have the different security types that we want to scan for. We'll just go ahead and enable them all, and we'll start the scan. So once I start the scan, you'll see here a pending status. Now this pending status typically takes about 20 to 30 seconds as it starts up the server for executing the scans, gets all the threads ready, and starts up all the headless browsers, the Phantom.js browsers. Once it actually starts up and starts scanning, we'll see a scanning process, and in the current progress we will see the URL that it's currently scanning. I currently have it set to update every 2 seconds, I believe, with whatever current page that it's looking at. And as we see here, it's starting to get some issues identified with this particular web server, and we'll see the name, what it considers the severity of that security issue, the URL that it was found on, and the recommended remedy for fixing that issue. And it has quite a number already. This scan process will take several minutes for a small website, up to 8 to 10 hours for large websites with many pages on that. And again, we have the ability to pause the scan, resume the scan, and if we so desire, we can remove the scan. So I will go to a completed scan that I completed earlier on the same web domain, and we can go ahead and export the issues. We'll see that it took about 2 minutes and 52 seconds, as this is a smaller website and only contains less than 20 pages. And we'll export a security scan, and we'll save that to the desktop as well. So we'll go ahead and take a look at, oh, that's the wrong one. So security scan, and here we see all the different issues that it found on that web domain, and these things can range from cross-site scripting to uh, SQL injection to just generic issues that it found with the configuration of the web server. So once we've completed that, we can go ahead and close the application. So that's the Web Ninja software, and it is the project that was created as part of my Capstone project. It isn't necessarily developed with new software to me, but it is a new use of that software. I've never really worked with this type of project before, so I have learned a lot, and it has been quite insightful, and I've learned a lot of things that I'll be able to apply to my future career as a web developer. So I hope you've enjoyed the presentation, and I hope you have a great day.